What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we got a good one for you guys. In today's video, we're going to be going over our top 5 draft day mistakes that you should be avoiding. Not only will we be outlining these mistakes, but we'll also be letting you guys know what you should be doing to make sure to avoid them. And I think many of us can admit that we are guilty from one time or another of experiencing some of these mistakes. This video is more going to focus on the strategy side. We're not going to really be going into specific players for this upcoming season. If you guys are wanting a complete refresher on everything you need to know before entering your draft, we actually posted that exact video just a few days ago, so I'll make sure to link it, and if you're interested in that, all you have to do is click on the top right hand corner of your screen and it will take you directly to that video. If between these two videos doesn't fully prepare you for your draft, we have the absolute cheat code, which is our draft package. So for those of you that may be new, starting your research process a little bit late, or for some of you others that just want to step your game up this season, our draft package is completely loaded this year, jam-packed with useful information and tools to immediately help you in your league. So if you missed out on researching, you will have access to our sleepers, our targets, our busts, player projections, risk ratings, video player breakdowns on the top 150 players. So if you've already drafted your team and want to go back and see our specific take on the players you drafted, we recommend going back and looking at the individual videos we posted on those players. All-in access members will also gain access to the private Discord community group, retain access for the entire season as well, and considering that there are numerous other tools and resources available in our draft package that I simply don't have the time to go over in this video, it's easy to see how our draft package is a no-brainer pick to help you in your fantasy team this season. If you're interested, that's at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that, as always, in the description box below. With that being said though, it's time to hop over to our stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which player in 2020 had the longest punt return in the NFL last season. The correct answer was actually Keelan Cole. Congratulations to Jared Roberts, the first to get this right on YouTube, and as for Twitter, at JaredAllen72. Once again, congratulations to both of you. But as for today's stat of the day, only counting games where a quarterback had thrown for over 150 passing yards, which quarterback last season had the best single game performance when it comes to completion percentage. Once again, that's which quarterback in 2020 had the best single game completion percentage. They do have to meet the minimum threshold though of 150 passing yards. If you know who that player is, let us know in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Alright guys, without further ado, let's hop right into our top 5 draft day mistakes to avoid. The first draft day mistake, I don't blame you if you think it sounds simple, but it's not doing enough research. As we all know, many of our best drafts are on the back of seasons or off seasons where we put in the most amount of work. And even though I'm using terms like research and work, that doesn't necessarily mean that in order to be successful and gain an edge over your competition, you need to open up spreadsheets, dive into the statistics. No, in fact, I think the most valuable use of your time will simply be to just keep up with the news and updates throughout the off season. I definitely recommend starting with Twitter. It's a phenomenal resource to keep up with NFL beat writers. Whenever there are massive updates like trades and injury news, Twitter's always the place that gets it first, and it trickles down to the other outlets like NFL Network or possibly SiriusXM. So if you're somebody who gets most of your information from those mainstream media outlets, we definitely recommend dabbling into Twitter if you haven't already. Even if you start off following just Adam Schefter and a handful of beat writers, you're going to be light years ahead of some of your opponents that only get their information from mainstream media sources. And when it comes to fantasy, sometimes getting the information first can be very valuable in making sure you get some of those players that a lot of people are sleeping on. For instance, just this past week, we had J.K. Dobbins go down with a season-ending injury. The week before that, Travis Etienne. So running backs that were virtually an afterthought like James Robinson, Gus Edwards, these are players that skyrocketed up draft boards. Being the first person in your league to have access to that information can be a massive leg up over your opponents. The best example of this paying off is when it comes down to the waiver wire. How many times in your league have you heard the news break about a player getting injured, so you jump over to that waiver wire, try to get the backup that you know is on free agency, only to find out that your opponent picked them up just 20 minutes prior simply because they had a leg up when it came to information speed. Not taking these additional steps is going to be a mistake, and it will be an advantage your opponents have over you. So eliminate that, get on Twitter, keep up with the updates, and that's just one small change you can make that you will immediately feel the results from. Fear not though, for those of you others who may not have kept up with all the player news throughout this offseason and training camp, we've actually added a completely new segment of our website called Trending Players. In this portion of our website, we continuously add the most important updates and give our take on the fantasy impact of each of these updates, whether it be good or bad. bad for the player, how it also impacts the players around them the entire offseason, if we should alter our expectations overall, and if any of them adjusted in the rankings. So if you're somebody who may be guilty of this draft day mistake, possibly behind in your own research process, we definitely recommend checking out that section of our website. It's of course completely free, no membership required, so if you're ever unsure if you did miss any big updates, you can always use that as a resource to double check. One thing I've certainly realized over the years, and a tip I could pass down to you, is that keeping up with the news and updates is much easier than catching up with the news and updates, and with routines it seems like no work at all. With that said though, let's hop right into the second draft day mistake we have in today's video. In the order in which I do have these draft mistakes listed is the order in which I would have them as priority. So with draft mistake number 1 being not doing enough off-season research, we would definitely recommend focusing on that before worrying about draft mistake number 2, which is failing to identify your own specific targets and avoids. We could even take this one a step further. We also want to identify our sleepers, our busts, which players we feel confident are the best value picks in the draft and where we feel comfortable taking them. And clearly you can see how draft mistake number 2 is going to be very difficult to rectify if you have not taken care of draft mistake number 1. Without that off-season research being done, how are you going to know which player is a good draft pick, which one's going to be a good value? While we could always make assumptions on that and go off of other people's rankings, that's a short-term solution that's destined to have you leaving the draft not feeling as confident as you would if you did your own research, using that information to either create your own rankings or take rankings from an analyst that you feel confident in. That right there will be a winning formula to not only make sure that you leave the draft with strong players, but you can feel confident that the players you are leaving with are the ones that you feel best about. When it comes to our rankings, we always suggest that you guys make specific adjustments to the players that you see fit. When it comes to fantasy football, none of us are ever going to see directly eye to eye when it comes to player analysis, so even if for the most part you do agree with our rankings, never be afraid to make those minor adjustments, pull the trigger on the guys you like, because ultimately that's the only way that you can guarantee you're leaving the draft with a team that you feel 100% confident in. As for value picks, the best way to identify those is to bounce up the rankings against the current ADP. A quick shout out to another free and great feature that we have on the website is going to be the ADP section of the site. This hands down is one of my favorite resources and tools that I use in my own draft preparation. I recommend actually everybody, whether they sign up for our draft package or not, this should be a staple that we all use to help prepare for our drafts, and I'll tell you exactly why. In this section of the site, we've compiled all of the draftable players and put the ADP in which they're being drafted on each platform, whether it's Yahoo, NFL, ESPN, Sleeper, FFPC. We have the most up-to-date ADPs for all of those platforms and each player where they're going. The benefit of having this resource and having all of the ADPs in one place is you're easily able to identify which players on the platform you're actually drafting on are coming in as good values as compared to the other platforms, which players are highway robbery if you draft them at their ADP. And with the simplistic format that we do have, it's very user-friendly. Even if you want to just go and take a look at the platform you know you're drafting on, for instance, let's say you know you're drafting on ESPN, all you'll have to do is go to the best value column, filter for ESPN, and right there you're going to have a list of which players are the best value on ESPN as compared to other leagues. And since we're using ESPN as an example, I'm just going to go to the site and pull the most recent list of players that are coming in at the best value and let you know some significant players that I think are interesting to look at. Right off the bat, one of my favorite players that's coming in as an excellent value on ESPN is Cooper Kupp. Right here I can see on ESPN he's coming in at the best value as compared to the other platforms. Currently coming off the board 45th overall, a much better value when compared to other platforms like FFPC and Yahoo, where he's coming off the board 39th and 37th alike. Another player, Gus Edwards. As we know, J.K. Dobbins has gone down with a season-ending injury. ESPN, though, hasn't fully updated their rankings. He's still coming off the board 122nd overall. That, once again, is the best value across all platforms. Yahoo, Sleeper, they've already made adjustments. Yahoo is coming in 38th overall. Sleeper, a bit of a better value, but still expensive compared to ESPN, coming in 67th. How we can use that information to our advantage is if we were drafting today, knowing Gus Edwards is currently ranked outside the top 100, even though we do have him as a top 20 running back, that means we could possibly wait to draft him until a bit later in our draft, maybe the 4th or possibly 5th round, an area and stage of the draft where on the other platforms he would be unlikely to fall, but on ESPN, And since he's so far down draft boards, knowing this before we even get into our draft is going to be a massive leg up and advantage we'll have over our opponents. Now keep in mind, I'm not saying executing these types of moves are going to be easy. One way to make sure that you can do that is by avoiding draft mistake number 3, which is not doing enough mock draft. If you're someone who's already either well aware of your draft position or the platform you're drafting on, doing mock drafts is an incredible tool to not only gauge player values and how your roster could ultimately end up looking like at the end of the day and for the upcoming fantasy season, but it's undoubtedly the one thing that you can do routinely that is guaranteed to help you have a smooth draft experience. I can tell you firsthand that somebody who's done 20, 30 mock drafts over the offseason is going to have a much easier time on actual draft day than somebody who may have only done one mock draft the night before draft. Ideally, by the time your draft comes around, if you want to be fully prepared, have that advantage like we mentioned, the best thing you can do is to do as many mock drafts as it takes for you to feel completely comfortable. One thing that I use to try to trick myself, make it a bit more difficult on me, is I'll start a mock draft. I won't look at the board or pre-plan my pick until I'm actually on the clock, typically the clock either being a 30-second clock or 60-second clock, so I know that as soon as the bell rings, I know it's my turn. I only have 30 seconds to 60 seconds to analyze what players were drafted after my last pick, which players are still available on the board, make my next selection, and try and figure out which player is most likely to fall to me in the next pick based upon my opponent's roster composition. Limiting myself to just that 30 to 60 second timer, it means you not only have to be well aware of players' ADPs, where they're going in the draft, but you also have to be completely confident and consistent with which players you're targeting, which ones you're avoiding, the rounds in which you feel confident in taking them, because when you're on the clock with such a limited amount of time, thinking through those types of decisions while on the clock is just not really an option. You'll ultimately end up running out of time, making the incorrect decision. But as I mentioned, practice makes perfect, and the only way to master that skill is by repetition. Now, assuming that you've already focused on draft mistake number 1, doing your research, you've already mastered draft mistake number 2, confidently identifying your targets and avoids, and if you've used that information to help you with the third draft mistake, the mock drafts, then at this point, we're ready to prioritize the fourth draft mistake, failing to know your league. Knowing your league can consist of many different things. Things like knowing which players that your league mates are going to target. That meaning if it's a hometown league, are some of the players in your league fanboys of a certain team? Are those players expected to come off the board a bit earlier? Can you use that to your advantage? Is that ultimately going to be a disadvantage? And failing to know your league can come down to even more basic fails like not fully understanding the scoring settings or how many teams are drafting, how many roster spots on each team. Each one of those factors can have major implications on the order in which players are going to come off my draft board. For instance, if it's a smaller league, an 18 league, I'm trying to do my best to get one of those elite quarterbacks and tight ends because I know separating myself between my opponents is not going to be easy when everybody has a loaded team. An example of how roster spots can impact how we draft is, let's say for instance, you're in a draft where you have to start 3 or maybe 4 wide receivers. And in a league like that, we would have to prioritize the wide receiver position a bit more because the wide receivers overall will be in much more demand. Without knowing that before the draft and preparing for that, how would we know where players are actually coming off the board in our draft if we didn't prepare for this in our mock drafts earlier? We wouldn't. And when it comes to knowing your league and knowing these scoring settings and how that impacts your drafts, we all know how much of a difference PPR makes when compared to standard leagues and how much that inflates the running back position as a whole. And with leagues like Superflex and tight end premium becoming more and more prevalent, these are things that we're going to have to be made aware of because now more than ever, different leagues are having different settings. Your draft preparation is going to heavily rely on not only the platform you're drafting on, but the scoring settings, the roster size. Then at that point, we should be focusing and prioritizing our attention on how our league mates are going to be drafting, finding areas where we can use their draft tendencies in previous seasons to help give us an advantage on draft day. For example, when it comes to homers who typically draft players on the same team, the teams that they're fans of, we know those players and their ADPs are going to be much inflated in this league. And ultimately, if that means they're being drafted ahead of their ADP, that means on the flip side, another player is falling down and becoming a greater value. If we're able to identify those values and on top of identifying them, capitalize on them, and it's those small moves that you make consistently time over time that end up adding up and giving you an advantage. And while getting one player at a value may not seem like it's making a massive difference, when you add up all these small advantages that you've gained throughout this offseason by doing your research, being confident in your draft, using your opponent's tendencies against them, by combining all of these, you'll realize it's not only much easier than you think, but you're going to love your team much more when you end up leaving on on draft day. Which leads us to the fifth and the final draft day mistake, which kind of combines everything into one, and it's just about not being prepared. Preparation is going to consist of doing all of these things over time and throughout the offseason. You'll find yourself in a much better position for fantasy and your fantasy draft if you start your research process and start your preparation process in the earlier months of the offseason, like June and July, as opposed to August. With that said, it's not the only way to have success for fantasy. I know many of you out there, you're extremely sharp, can do all of these things on your own and naturally do them without thinking, so you don't need a ton of help. But for those of you out there that want an extra edge, or maybe you're not interested in diving to each player's individual statistics and injury history, so instead you'd rather listen to an individual player breakdown that has all that information at your disposal, that right there is a completely viable strategy that will likely end up with the same results. And that's not to say that you have to invest or pay into a draft package. We at our website have many useful tools that can help you in your draft research process. Like I mentioned in this video, the trending players tab, completely free. Catch up with all the news and notes or stay up to date with them, member or not, that's available to you. And also the ADP tab, which I had mentioned, where you can bounce the rankings up against the different platforms, letting you know which players coming in at the best value, which players you should likely avoid because their ADP is going much too high when compared to the other platforms. That free resource I can guarantee you will give you a leg up over your competition. But not only that, I can also let you know that your league mates aren't going to have access to this information. As far as I know, nobody else is producing this right now, at least not in an easy to digest format. Maybe people are opening up the draft boards of both platforms, looking at them side by side, but that fails in comparison to what we produced, and like I mentioned, completely free. So member or not, come check it out. We want to help you guys in your draft. We want to make sure that you guys are drafting the best teams possible, whether we agree with the players that you like or not. Like I mentioned, the ball's in your court. We want you to draft the guys you like. We want you to get them at good values. And our goal the entire offseason is to make sure that happens. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. Which draft day mistake did I leave out on this video? Let us know in the comment section down below. But if you enjoyed, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. Catch you on the next one.